Hello, it's wonderful to be here. My name is Maria Spies. I'm the Co-Chief Executive Officer of Holon IQ, and my presentation today is focusing on global EdTech trends and investment, as well as launching the 2024 East Asia EdTech 150. So for those of you who are not aware of Holon IQ, we are a market intelligence platform that tracks the education market, including investment, new teams and startups, as well as key trends and strategic shifts in the area of education and technology and futures. I know that you've got a wonderful conference today over the next couple of days, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this wonderful event. My presentation today will be in three parts. Part number one is just an overview of global EdTech trends. Part number two is following the money, investment and capital flows. And the third area will be launching the 2024 East Asia EdTech 150, which is the list of the most promising EdTech startups that we run every year all around the world. Firstly, global EdTech trends. Generally, what we're seeing after all the analysis of the data points that we gather is that attention to student engagement, particularly as it relates to digital engagement and digital student experience and retention, is very, very important and will continue to be important going forward. The changing and responding to student demand and also demand from the market about what people want to learn and how they want to learn it. The third element is building of core digital infrastructure and AI impacts into formal education. And so we're seeing solutions that focus very, very directly on learner experience and outcomes. That might be gamification, it might be in real-time testing, all sorts of solutions in EdTech that are focusing on student engagement and retention and the learner experience. Of course, generative AI, but all AI is, it's still in the early phases, but it's being integrated even into formal education, not only teaching about AI, but also using artificial intelligence inside the learning process. Thirdly, the world of work has changed. So there's a big skills gaps and persistent skills shortages and mismatches. So there's a whole new approaches to talent is manifesting itself in EdTech. And finally, infrastructure. One can't have big data and artificial intelligence without good, solid, secure infrastructure that is interoperable. And so we're seeing a lot of work in that area and a lot of investment as well. When we ask education leaders all around the world, what are the top trends that are impacting education? AI, of course, is number one. Secondly, personalization. Third, assessment. Fourth, learning analytics. This is all got to do with artificial intelligence and data. And so we're seeing the application of advanced technologies making its way right into learning processes. Number 5 and 6, apprenticeships, micro-credentialing, unbundling. This is more around models, different models of learning. And so unbundling, sort of bundled learning, and also work integration is becoming very important. And the next two relate to wellness and well-being and tutoring and academic and non-academic support for students is becoming more important. And finally, STEAM and coding and simulated learning. So again, the applications of technology. Of course, this is not just impacting education, but the digital five forces, mobility, big data, social media, cloud computing, AI and robotics, are impacting all industries, particularly and especially education, through mobile learning, personalized journeys, disaggregating content, social and gamified experiences. But when we think about artificial intelligence, it's more than just on the sidelines. This is becoming a national priority. So building capability in artificial intelligence is becoming national priority for many countries around the world. And this vibrancy index shows the assessment of artificial intelligence across 20 countries on different dimensions. And so I've put a note there for Korea on South Korea on where the strength is. This is a heat map. So the darker the square, the more intense or vibrant, essentially. And so what we see here is the top area is journal publications. This is research, and the US is leading there, the UK and China as well. But when you look at that per capita, which is the middle section, you see a whole different story. So you see Singapore and Switzerland and Israel and Australia and others come to the fore. When we go down to the next area, which is sort of patents, artificial intelligence patents, South Korea is very strong. And then again, when we move down to hiring, skill penetration, again, we see darker squares in South Korea, in Israel, in India, and in Singapore and places like that. So countries are very, very serious about building AI capacity, not only in research and also technology, but also skill penetration of the population. And then you see policy like embedding artificial intelligence and machine learning and so on into even elementary schools. Of course, there are always key concerns. Is the data secure? Who has access to it? How were the training algorithms built? How can we ensure that everybody has equitable access? Does it work? So these are the sort of fundamental questions that governments are still asking, and that will continue for some time. But what we are seeing is, the embedding of advanced technologies right inside learning processes, not just around the edges, but how do we support students? How do we provide social learning opportunities and authentic experiences? Observing learning, for example. How do you test, how do you know that someone's learning if they're not right next to you or they're doing something in the evening or so on? Well, this is through data. And so observation has become a data issue. And how do you assess learning and provide flexible digital content? And these are all the elements. So it's quite complex, but there's a lot of work occurring and a lot of solutions actually in each of these areas. When we ask education institutions a number of questions about their use of AI, what are your plans? Over the last 2019, 2022, and 2023, what we see is actually quite a lot of change, especially for educational institutions. So in 2019, for example, only 19% of educational institutions that we surveyed had a pilot in progress, but a quarter, it was on the radar, but not even planned. And fast forward to 2023, and we see a whole different story. So it's not just around the edges, but institutions at their core are now building artificial intelligence, the use of AI into their institutions, whether that be K-12 or higher education. And of course, this is a market map of artificial intelligence and how it's being used in education, from language and literacy to teacher productivity, personalized learning, language learning, assessment, research and study tools, and so on. So there's vast applications across the learner life cycle. In K-12, when we zoom right out and think about what are the strategic shifts occurring, we are seeing much more focus in K-12 on evidence-based methods and technologies prioritizing equity and inclusiveness and engagement for learners. Also, digital is becoming a core underpinning element of even K-12. Doesn't have to be all online, of course, but every student, even if they're in classroom, will have an integrated digital experience. The world has got, in terms of tomorrow's teaching, the world has got a huge shortage of teachers. And so we need to think differently about teaching and teachers and what their roles are. So we're seeing some very interesting applications there. 360 Safety thinks about more than technical safety but also emotional and digital safety. And so we're seeing a more holistic approach to that. And then finally, a return to focus on fundamentals, a renewed focus on literacy and math. and so, you know, STEM as well. But these sort of core literacies, essentially. When we ask institutions in K-12 around the world, you know, what are the biggest challenges for them? Teacher retention is number one, followed by, which is very immediate, but followed by preparing students for the learners for the future, which is a long-term issue. But schools around the world are worried about how to prepare learners for an unknown future. And then third is staff and student well-being. And so these are the sort of areas that schools are worried about and thinking about right now. When we think about higher education, there's different things occurring, especially at the market level, at the structure level. So we are seeing the implementation of new credentials in post-secondary education. So new forms of credentials will play a greater role, and they're being more endorsed by and accepted by employers and so on. The importance of education and work together, integration of work integrated learning is more important than ever. And so we're going to see a lot more of that. At the same time, universities are not just competing with universities anymore. There is a new type of competition for those lifelong learners. Omnichannel learning relates to the expectation that students would be able to study on campus or online or in a hybrid model all at once. And so there's challenges there for higher education institutions. And finally, and related, of course, is the expectation of consumer grade tech experiences like we experience in all other parts of our lives. People expect that type of seamless integration of technology and use across all their devices in education too. And so these are the key shifts that are occurring in higher education globally. You know, even recognition of work integrated models and credentials from non-traditional employers, non-traditional providers are sort of making their way through even into policy. So we see credential recognition, degree level apprenticeships, work integrated learning, the whole model of apprenticeships being changing as well. So this is at the market level. We're seeing some movement there. In the US, the data shows that by 2030, you know, non-degree credentials will be the most awarded form of credential in the US. And so this is significant. That's to say that universities are not waiting for others to do it. They're jumping in and delivering degrees and non-degree credentials. And so the integration of those two things is going to become very important. When we ask higher education institutions what's important to them in terms of digital capability, over the, you know, a 3 years survey, we see a movement to the back end, to the work and lifelong learning. So the blue segments are the most critical. And for example, we see a movement from in 2020 through to 2022, where the criticality of work and lifelong learning is becoming much more important to institutions of higher education. For workforce education, the type of changes that are occurring over a 10-year period, these sort of strategic shifts, include lifelong and continuous. So not episodic anymore, but the expectation that, you know, this continuous change in learning as technology changes and jobs change. The learning will be embedded into their work, not some separate activity that will occur outside their work. And so this is very important for anyone in EdTech or anyone in education institutions. Learning is expected to be digital, it's expected to be flexible, and it's expected to be personal. And so again, that speaks to this sort of digital and data infrastructure. The focus on experience is paramount. And so the learner's experience is not about content anymore, really. It's about the learner experience. And then finally, what people will learn, how they will learn it, and how it's counted is going to be very important. So the choice of what they need to learn in an ongoing way will be data driven. It's like, where are my gaps? What do I need to know for the next job or the next, you know, promotion or so on? And whatever I learn, I expect it to be counted. And this speaks to this sort of micro credentials and personalized learning. Let's move on to the second part, which is EdTech investment and capital flows. And so what we see here is, you know, a huge increase in investment up to 2021, and then a big collapse essentially, and it's continued to go. That's to 2023, and 2024 is the same. It's continued that collapse. Essentially, EdTech over 2020 and 2021, there was a lot of very big rounds happening, and investors are not seeing the returns that they expected to see. And so we're seeing some right sizing, I would say, of EdTech investment globally. That's not to say there is an investment. So, in terms of different markets, most of them follow the same format. United States, Europe has not collapsed as much. Europe was underfunded for quite some time. India and China are the big areas where there's been, a sort of a real pulling back of venture capital, at least in EdTech. But what's really happened here is these very, very big rounds are gone, essentially. And so, the sort of $250 million rounds are gone. The 100 to 250 million also gone. So anything over $100 million is sort of, that was a bit overblown in EdTech. And now we're seeing a lot more smaller rounds. And so the challenge for EdTech companies is to get over that initial seed stage and get to round A and B, and of course to C and so on. Where is the capital going? Well, here you see a bubble chart of different rounds. So each one of these rounds, this is a 2023 EdTech venture capital globally. And so we see strength in management systems. This is digital infrastructure. And this is learning environments and so those systems that help schools and universities and so on. Workforce and skills is very big. There's a lot of demand in this area. And again, language learning, tutoring and test prep, etc., they still remain, but there's a few big areas, as I've mentioned. But I wanted to focus in on where are the small rounds? Where are those, smaller than $10 million rounds? Upskilling is quite large. And you can see here, East Asia and Pacific is that mustard color. And so, upskilling is big. Learning environments, that's that infrastructure, and things like language learning and STEAM and coding are very strong in East Asia, whereas in other markets, there's other strengths. But essentially, overall, we're seeing upskilling very large, learning environments very large, and so on. Just zooming right out, workforce takes around 50% of all venture capital into EdTech. It's about half is workforce. That's been steady for quite some years. K-12, is a little less than that, followed by higher education and a small sort of early childhood. And then where we see of that same amount of venture capital investment, North America is around 50%. Europe comes next at around 22%. East Asia and the Pacific, we're looking at about 10% here. And South Asia, about 12 or so on. And so that's the sort of the split of funding over the globe in 2023, and it's about the same. North America is for venture capital anyway, about at the moment it's about 50%, and that's been that way since really 2022 or 2021. And we'll see how that goes over the coming years. The final part of my presentation is to launch the East Asia EdTech 150. I wanted to give you a little bit of context for the East Asia EdTech 150. Firstly, this is an annual list. And so Holden IQ identifies the 1,000 most promising EdTech companies globally every year, and we do it region by region. And East Asia is a 150 list, and Europe and North America and so on, Latin America and so on. The list is built, as I said, region by region. It's for startups, and so there's a couple of criteria here. Just let me run through that. So age is important. If you are over 10 years old, you're not really a startup. So we're looking at the early stage and building, early stage startups. For each of the lists, those organizations need to be headquartered in the geography or build most of their revenue from that geography. The scope includes, of course, hardware and software, but anything that's advancing sort of education solutions. Importantly, to be in the list for the criteria, the organization needs to be pre-exit, not a subsidiary of another company, not a product of another company, and certainly not exited or owned by PE or private equity or anything like that. So that's sort of the eligibility side of it. And when we look at the methodology, we look at thousands and thousands of companies all around the world. We look at their market, not just the geographical market, but what's the market they're playing? Is it language learning? Is it early childhood, and so on? What's the attractiveness and growth of that market? The product itself and its uniqueness, the team and experience and diversity, their team's ability to generate capital. That might be through raising money externally, or it could be through revenue generation, and the momentum of the organization. So they are the sort of criteria. And so congratulations to those organizations that are on this market map. This is the 2024 East Asia EdTech 150. And this market map shows these organizations organized by our subsectors. So there's STEAM, tutoring and test prep, digital content, workforce and skills, language learning, and so on. And so I want to sort of make a point of congratulating the companies that are in this list. We did a bit of analysis on the list over the last couple of years. So since 2020, we've been doing the East Asia EdTech 150. And so what we see here in the 2024 cohort is, even all years, it's a very diverse set of solutions. This is very healthy. This means that EdTech is having an impact across all parts of the education sector, rather than just being concentrated in one or two areas. So that's a very healthy sign. Not all markets are like this. The largest group is STEAM. And so science, technology, engineering, arts and maths, and so on. And that's East Asia is well known for strength in this area, but that keeps growing. So in 2020, where it was 12%, and then we sort of moving up, and now over a fifth. And then the second area, which has also been growing actually over the last 4 years, is management systems. This is the digital infrastructure that formal education systems need in order to deliver digitally. And so this is also a great sign, because it shows that the formal education system, schools and universities and so on, are also building digital into their processes, and they're partnering with EdTech to do that. The other thing, of course, very strong and always is the language learning space, and so on. And so we see a little bit of a good diversity across the whole life cycle here. When we look at it by geography, what we see is a sort of South Korea strengthening EdTech ecosystem. China's move and change in regulation has made a big impact on that market. And so we see a shrinking sort of proportion. I mean, obviously China's very large still, but the proportion of EdTech here is shrinking, and in very much part to do with the changing regulations. But also Japan and Taiwan and Hong Kong and so on, also quite strong. It's balanced, and it's getting more balanced as time goes on. It's interesting to see business model. So B2B models can keep edging up here. From 25% in 2022 to 27 to 31. And again, this management systems not only, but a lot of management systems deliver and sell to universities, to schools, to governments, and so on, for the formal education system. But of course, direct-to-consumer EdTech is still the dominant part of the market in this part of the world. And then when we look at age of these organizations, remember we have a cutoff of 10 years. And so what we see here in 2024 is a more mature group of startups. And with more than a quarter between 9 and 10 years old. So they're going to cycle out in the next year. Another quarter in 7 to 8 years old, and so on and so on. A good strong group of growth stage companies, 4 to 6 years old, and a very small proportion of early stage companies. This is not unusual. It's a bit of a pattern around the world since COVID, when it's been very difficult for early stage companies to get the funding to get across into that growth stage. But that does mean that more early stage support is going to be needed in this market. Because we want to see, we want to see more early stage companies coming through, and that's going to require external support. And again, I wanted to congratulate the organizations that are on the East Asia EdTech 150 list this year. You will all be receiving emails from us and badges and so on. And you can go to our website and have a look more deeply at the East Asia EdTech 150. But again, congratulations, and thank you so much for inviting me to present at the conference. And I hope you have a wonderful day, wonderful rest of the conference, and hopefully I will be able to join in person at some time in the future. Thank you so much.